Hey everyone, it's Rusty Nelson here talking watercolor again for this week. This is episode 6. So I had a few good comments from last week. Nothing major, but a couple of nice little comments that I think I can address fairly quickly right now. I think one person was talking about having oversaturated sunsets, trying to paint some sunsets, and they're kind of looking a little bit too neon-ish. So that's essentially, I think, the biggest problem is maybe just too much pigment in the washes as you're laying them down. Another person was commenting about essentially just it's good to have these little exercises, these spheres and basic shape tutorials that I've been posting that they felt like they were maybe biting off more than they can chew at the moment. So doing these little exercises with fruits and balls and things to just build skills, focusing on some very specific things before they move into some bigger assignments has been helpful. So I thought that was a nice comment, and definitely I think that's a way to go about and to approach. Not to say that you shouldn't try to do more complex scenes and things, but definitely go in and work on those fundamental shapes and figure out how to get shadow sides to look right, mixing simple color palette and then expanding into a more complex color palette and seeing how those colors interact. So you're really learning a lot about your color theory, your lighting and shading and modeling and shadows, and just getting that various stage, whatever stage you're working at, to work properly and to achieve the end result that you're looking to achieve. So definitely keep working with those fundamental skill sets as you're growing your skills. Definitely that's a good thing. And what else? Let's see. Last week I posted a bunch of drawing. Actually, so I like a charcoal drawing house short I posted out, I think, earlier in the week. And working with charcoal on newsprint, it's a good way just to warm up, get those creative juices flowing. And charcoal is a less of a control medium than pencil, so you have a tendency of working really tightly if you're working with pencils. So switching over and working with charcoal, I was working with a charcoal pencil, kind of a hybrid, but I do expose a lot of the charcoal tip and use a lot of the scratchy sides to get mass marks and not just line marks. And even if I am drawing with line, they're pretty thick and chunky. So it definitely gets you out of a control mode if you're working with charcoal. And I did a couple of ink illustrations, and I posted one. The Bald Eagle was all about working with line art and ink, and really kind of stripping away all the options you might have with a dry media like charcoal or pencil, where you can create mass marks and even do smudging and get tone and go from really dark marks to light marks depending upon the pressure you're applying. So ink line, you don't have those options. You're either making a mark or you're not making a mark, and it can be a thick mark, it can be a thin mark, but it can't be a light mark or a dark mark. You have to do that through illusions of working with hatching, directional line, how tightly, how loosely you pack those lines together will read as tone. So that's a lot of fun with ink, and I've always been surprised that students do so well with ink drawing, because I always thought ink was a little more difficult than just drawing with pencil. But again, I started out with pencil and worked with pencil so much that once I started doing a line, it was definitely kind of a different beast to kind of contend with. But you just have to learn the nuances of each one of the media that you're working with. It's similar to working with like these student grade things. You're going to learn how all of that student grade stuff handles, and then when you do move into a professional, or at least a more professional grade of paper and media, be it pen and ink or watercolor or whatever, you're going to discover the nuances that those nicer quality materials have that the other ones didn't. Doesn't mean you can't create nice pieces with the student grade stuff. It just means that you're going to realize, once you have worked with the student grade for so long and understand how it functions, and then you switch over to the professional grade, you're going to see a broader range of things that you can do with that media. So it'll be some fun stuff. So I definitely posted, let's see, ink line, the charcoal, and I think, what was it? I had something else. I can't remember. I have to go back and look at my history. So I should have made a note. I didn't. Let's see. So this week I'm going to definitely, oh, I know what it was. I was going to post a ink line and watercolor wash piece where I drew it was a bird, another bird. I think it was a chicken. No, it was the eagle. I started out doing the eagle. I had to redo the eagle is what I did. And I drew it with that varsity fountain pen. Well, it's not insoluble ink. It reactivates when I went to start to add the color wash onto it. It blew up. I forgot that it wasn't an indelible ink, and it's immediately reactivated and started going gooey and fuzzy all over the place. So if you are wanting to do an ink wash and an ink drawing with color wash technique, which I have one coming up. I redid it with a chicken this time. That's what the chicken was. That's going to be posted early this week. And it'll give you, it's a nice lead in, and it's a nice easy way to get going maybe with watercolor. As your skills are developing, you're relying on the ink drawing to be the structure that sometimes students have problems with when they're getting started with watercolor. So you can kind of balance. You can make it a really tight line art illustration, add the color into it. It's almost like painting on a coloring book thing. But you have to get out of that mindset as well. You need to be willing to let colors go where they need to go in that technique. Or you can do it just the opposite. Lay down the color wash first, and it can be random, all sorts of wild, abstract kind of application of the color. Let it dry, and then come back in with the ink line and draw the object on top of the ink wash. And that's a nice technique as well. So either do the line art first and then do the color, or do the color first and then do the line art. So it's a nice way of kind of experimenting and seeing what you like doing. So a lot of people like that structure of the ink line in place, and then come in and just kind of fill in the colors where it needs to be. Or other people are a little more, maybe a little looser mindset, and they'll do the color work first and then try to pull in and do the line art and add the structure in. So it's both ways will work. It's just a matter of deciding on what works best for you. I'm going to have some more fruit tutorials, starting with basic shapes. I have another circle. I'm going to be dropping a peach. I did a peach, and that's definitely I'm doing it on a better grade of paper. I think it's a Strathmore 300. It's still not the top tier watercolor paper, but it holds the moisture longer. And this peach is going to be definitely more of a wet on wet color interaction inside the shape of the peach, while trying to get 3D form in addition to all these other colors that are on the surface that has that surface quality on the peach, without a lot of tight structure or sharp edges and stuff like that. So that one will be fun. I'll be dropping that one this week. I have a glass orb that I'm going to be doing, and that one's definitely for reflections on the surface. And another still life coming up that is more about the not only the reflections, but the transparent qualities of glass as well. That'll be coming up, along with my first vegetable. Have I done a vegetable? I don't think I've done a vegetable yet. I've got a vegetable that's based off of a square. I wonder what that could be. It's a pepper, like the standard green pepper or a ripening pepper. That's definitely a basic square shape first, with a lot of round qualities to it. And then I have another pepper that works with the cone shape. So definitely giving you an idea of how those fundamental cones and cubes and circles that you're working to create those three-dimensional forms are coming into play. So gives you more things to practice, to get better at, get your color transitions, your color interactions all working with your various states of watercolor. You're wet on wet, you're wet on dry, you're dry on wet, and all those things. So just getting and building that hand and that visual vocabulary that you need when you go after and start trying to do a more complex scene, which the one viewer was mentioning that they just felt like these tutorials are good in developing those skills so that later when they start working on more complex scenes, they'll have the skills available and on hand for them to use when they get started doing that. So anyway, we're doing a lot of research this week. I was on doing better SEO tagging on my videos, trying to work and get a better a view count on my videos. So I'm still working to improve my videos. I feel like these little vlog posts have been helping. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable on screen. But I definitely did some SEO research and was looking for some of the things that people are searching for when they are on YouTube and typing in information on things they want to know about watercolor. And I have a couple of things I thought were interesting and would like just to quickly talk about. And I wrote down like 2 or 3 of I had like a list of 15 or 20 things that people are most searching for in the topic in the niche of watercolor. And I liked this one here was, what do you normally paint first on a watercolor? And it all depends on what type of a scene it is, what the background is, maybe the densities, the complexities of it. But if there is a background, I will typically, I block the whole thing. Try to get a basic sense of the colors on the entire scene throughout. I'm not worried about any details or anything like that. As a background, if I do the background, I'll let it dry, and then depending upon whether it needs to be wet or dry, I'll block in the subject matter, the focal point as well. And then that's when I let it dry, and then I'll start worrying about the next layer of information. Stage 2 is where you're looking for the more specific shapes, interlocking shapes, adding in the more saturated color, because that first color layer typically dries lighter than you're expecting or wanting. I know it's a shock when you lay that first layer of color down. It just is such a shock against that white paper. But lay that down and then let it dry, and then come back in and start building more shapes and specific information in stage 2, and then get it to a point where stage 3 you're adding in all that detail. So I guess the short question on that is I do the whole thing first just by color blocking, getting the local colors blocked in general. Then we can worry about the contrasting colors, the more intense shapes, and that in stage 2, and then detail in stage 3. So nothing you haven't heard me preaching in some of my videos so far. So common mistakes, and I think I've mentioned this a time or two. I think one of the biggest problems students have when they're first learning watercolor, especially when I'm showing the color blocking stage, is that they don't use a big enough brush, and that depending upon the sheet of paper, if they're doing a full 8.5 by 11 or 9 by 12 painting, they need a good 1.5 to 2-inch brush to block in colors, and that seems like a huge brush for that size. But again, if it's a nice flat brush, or it could be a big mop as well, you want to get a lot of media onto the paper as fast as possible. I saw one comment saying that one of the things students do is use too much water. Well, not at the color blocking stage. I mean, if it's dripping off, there's times you might want that, but it's actually just the opposite of what I've observed, is that they don't use enough water, and you can actually see the brush strokes that they applied stage 1 with, and you don't want to see that. You want it wet enough to where those colors, if it's a multiple color thing, they meld together in a nice gradient. There's no distinction. There's no brush strokes at that stage. Definitely use a little more water, and then make sure it's saturated to the degree that is maybe feels a little more saturated when you're first laying it down than what you intend, because remember, it dries lighter, especially if it's wet enough for those colors to meld together. So, and then another problem that they tend to do is that students will work the paper and try to mix the colors in that wash with their brush. And you need to add that color, add the next color in, and let the water do the work. You don't do a whole lot of the mixing yourself. Now glazing, you kind of, if you have a color down first and then come in and add the second color in, you can then, clean out your brush, get that water, come in and soften an edge, feather an edge out. So those are definitely two of the most common questions or problems that I've seen with students as they are getting started with their paintings. So think of it not so much of foreground, background, or the subject matter that you paint one thing all the way through first, and then you move on to the next thing. It's you're bringing that whole, everybody, at least my predominant viewership of this channel, are old enough to remember, and I use this example a lot. Oh, I'm past my time. With my students, and they don't get it anymore because of the digital realities now. But you have to think of your watercolor like you're developing a photograph. If you've ever developed an actual photograph using chemicals and everything with the light sensitive paper, it comes up from light to dark, and all that contrast comes in at the back end of the development process. And that's the same way with watercolor. You try to bring it up all at once. You don't work on sections or specific areas of the watercolor and get it just to the right point and then move on to the other thing. You bring it all up. You bounce around the whole scene and bring it together. And then that last 5%, that last 3% is when you're in there really adding the finishing touches, the highlights, that last little bit of contrast to make everything pop just where you want it to be. And based upon your own interpretation of whatever your subject matter was, whether it's a photograph of something or you're out painting plein air, you have a lot of creative decisions to make. Anyway, hey, oh my goodness, I'm a whole 2 minutes past my 15-minute limit. So I'll have to cut it short now. Thanks for watching this episode of Talking Watercolors. I hope it gave you a few tips that you might be able to work with and integrate into your practice and development as you're becoming a watercolor master. So keep watching, and if you found any value in this post, give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. See you then.